Welcome to the Iranian Studies Collective. Today we have Dr. Peter Good talking to us about his new book, The East India Company in Persia, Trade and Cultural Exchange in the 18th Century. We're very, very excited to have you back again, Peter. And finally, the book is out through the pandemic, through it all. It's here, fresh and ready for us. So yeah, thank you firstly for speaking to us about your book. And yeah, I look forward to hearing more about it in this session.
Well, thank you very much for having me back again. It's yeah, a great show of trust, especially on a day where we've got Storm Eunice blowing outside. You know, it's all been very exciting. Yeah, publishing a book in a pandemic had its challenges that I didn't quite see coming. But yeah, no, yeah, it's great. So it's great to be back. Thank you very much for having me again. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to discussing the book a bit more with you.
Yeah, perhaps as a good place to start is if you could give us a short summary of your book.
So the book covers broadly the years between 1700 and 1750 of the operations of the East India Company in Persia and the wider Persian Gulf region. Its chapters are divided thematically between the lived experience of the company's merchants, the way that the factory was managed and governed, the company's trade itself, although that's something that I tried to move away from, that just because it's a book about the East India Company doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a book, you know, a book of economic history, although it has to be in there, it's important. A chapter on how the East India Company was involved in the sort of construction of a Persian navy for Nader Shah in the 1720s and 30s. But again, you know, looking at it in terms of not from a sort of proto-imperialist perspective, which is a project that it definitely was not, and instead how this was part and parcel of doing business in Persia. And then finally, a chapter on the non-Europeans who were employed by the company in various roles and the conditions that they met with, and you know, ongoing from that, I'm currently writing an article about their working conditions and why they wanted to work for the company in the first place. So it's drawn from the East India Company's perspective. It's, you know, I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm writing a book about, you know, in part about Persia from mostly solely European sources due to a paucity of sources in Persian for it. There are some, but they very, very rarely mention the English at all. Yeah, and only then in very, very, yeah, very little detail. So while I've attempted with the book to talk about Persian agency, Persian policy, all of these sort of ideas of trying to, you know, how do we use these sources, not just to understand the English, but also the Persians, I'm very conscious of the fact that, you know, this is a European source base that's being used for this, and to approach that carefully. You know.
Well, thank you so much, Peter, for going through the book with us. I think it's very important that you what you said about being very careful about, you know, what sources you've used, and to sort of acknowledge the fact that yes, it's more European based, but that doesn't mean that you've ignored the Persian side of story. But and I'm sure you've done this very carefully and with a sensitivity that I'm sure those of us in Iranian studies is very familiar with. So thank you for that. Sorry, just to you know, for many of us, including myself, who are quite ignorant about the presence of the East India Company in Persia at this time, I just have one or two questions of clarification. You mentioned factory. What do you mean exactly by that?
So in the modern usage, so when we talk about a factory, somewhere where things are constructed or built, this comes from manufactory, so a place where it's manufactured. In this case, the sort of the original factory was a place where a factor, so a commercial agent, lived. So it's a factory in that sense. It's a place of commerce. It's a yeah, an area where merchants do their business. Yeah, factory in that sense.
I see. Okay. And I know, super basic question, but in terms of, and I assume that the East India Company was based solely in Hormuz, or were they in other places as well?
So they're never actually based in Hormuz. They're based in Bandarabas.
Ah,
So
okay.
they in 1622. So we're in the 400th anniversary year of the start of this Anglo-Persian relationship, which is something that I'm really keen to talk about a little bit more, especially given the longue durée relations of England and Iran, and especially of Britain and Iran. And especially now when relations are very, very poor, it's always good to remind ourselves as historians, but also the public more generally, that these relationships are very long term, long lasting. So 1622, the East India Company helped to remove the Portuguese from Hormuz after over a century of occupation. But they're not allowed to settle on the island. Instead, they are settled in the new, well, it's not new, but the newly renamed port of Bandarabas on the coast. So yes, they're there from they arrive in the first ship arrives in Persia 1616, which is the James. Arrives at a port in just at the mouth of the Gulf called Jask. So by 1622, the relationship's about 6 years old, really, officially. There had been others, other Englishmen who'd arrived in Persia before then, but for the sake of the narrative of the company, sort of 1616, 1622 are the big dates.
Oh, very interesting. Very, very interesting. And where does sort of Bandar Abbas and East India Company's presence in Persia, where does it fit in their general network in the Indian Ocean?
So this is one of the things that I want to know more about. So this book in many ways is the start of the project and not the end of it in some ways, because in my view it's right at the center of it. It's the Persian market for English wool and cloth, which is the major export from Europe, is one of the most successful. But Persia's own economic instability and relative poverty in comparison to the Mughal Empire make it quite a complex place to do business one way or another. But the company persists with it. It's always the Persian factory persists for until, well, I mean, the end of empire, so essentially 1857, end of the East India Company, 1858. So there is an English presence there for all of that time, and goods that are bought in Persia and shipped to India are an integral part of not just the company's official trade, but also the private trade of the merchants who worked for the company, because they were permitted private trade, unlike the Dutch, who did not permit private trade. So you get this, you get this movement, the fact that yes, Persia is sort of perched right out on the western extremity of what we consider to be the Indian Ocean area. But just as Hormuz had always been the diamond in the golden ring of the world, as was said about it, so Persia remains significant, but up until now has really been treated very peripherally. And this is what I'm trying to sort of move away from, is that actually these peripheral factories, if they can so be called, are the places where a lot of the merchants who then go on to become the governors of company cities in India, so whether Bombay, Madras, or Calcutta, as now Kolkata, Mumbai, and Chennai, or the parts of the various committees, or even governors. So they go on to be significant in India after a career in Persia. There's no division there. You don't just have the Persian factors in a little silo here, and then the Indian factories all together, and then Bantam or Mergui or all of these other places where the East India Company are. They're all interconnected. So where does it fit? I don't know, but I think far more centrally than it's previously been treated.
Oh, very, very interesting. And I think this is true of a lot of research that's coming out now. It's sort of trying to re-understand and revisit these port cities along the Persian Gulf Coast, especially on the Persian side, and trying to understand that they weren't really these pit stops, and they actually were quite central to trade networks, political networks as well. It's very interesting to just to hear more and read more about this. And I guess this comes quite nicely to my next follow-up question, which is where did the idea for the book come from?
So the idea for the book came from my PhD. So I was a PhD student with the University of Essex in the British Library on a AHRC funded collaborative doctoral award, well, collaborative doctoral partnership as it is now. So I was very lucky to sort of be mentored through using this archival collection by Margaret Makepeace, who is the India Office Records curator and was also my supervisor. So basically, originally the PhD's remit was go into the IORG series, IORG 29, which is the Persian factory records for the Gulf, and tell us something about them, because we don't know anything about them. They very rarely get used by historians. And by that I mean very rarely. Some of the volumes hadn't been ordered out by readers since the 70s. So it's a very long, but so some of it really isn't being utilized at all. So the remit of my PhD was go away and then tell us something about what you find. And so the PhD was a part of that, and then the book is kind of the culmination of that process of, well, what did I find in the factory records? And the answer is a lot. An entire world's worth of people's experiences of negotiations, of conflicts, of trade and all the rest of it, of disease and death and fun things like that. About pandemics. Who knew? When I started my PhD, I had no thought of a pandemic. All of these things sort of get brought up from it. And yes, the concept of the book really comes from that process of going through the PhD and desperately wanting to tell someone about Persia.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, you and myself, we do a lot of work with archival materials, and it's so easy to get caught up in these little details. So I'm wondering, in terms of usage of sources, and you've told us what sources you used. How are you able to sort of build a narrative out of all these little details? I mean, what's your method? Because for me, I wanted to tell the story of British policy in Iran during the Second World War, but then I'd get so involved in some side story. I remember coming across the story of this Polish woman who had an affair with an Iranian barber, but this was like a big thing. I know it was a huge thing in the archives, and there's like documents on this, and it's hard not to get really bogged down by these little details, which is so interesting and makes the research so enriching. But at the same time, as you said, you need to build a narrative, a story about what are the sources trying to tell us. Like, so how do you manage and navigate this source, this
Actually,
material?
personally, really badly, because I do the same as you, and,
Yeah,
and and the source was so rich in
yeah.
this detail that it's very, very difficult, and it's quite disparate, because in the end, the East India Company's diaries and records and this collection are the transactions of a commercial company. So the immediate thought is always, well, what the hell is this going to tell us about people's lived experience? And the answer is it's all there if you look, but you do have to sort of put take the time of actually unpicking all of this. What I found is that I've got about 250,000 words worth of notes that are in big Word documents for each volume, and that I spent a lot of time picking through where people are brought up in the letters, when did they arrive in Persia, where are they mentioned, what happened. some events sort of happen in, in relatively quick succession, or a noted relatively quick succession, because they affect the company's business. So there's a point where three merchants get into this real quandary about whether they should order a company ship to attack Muscati ships, at a time when the Muscatis are really sort of an emergent power in the Gulf in the 1720s and 30s. One of them says, no, we mustn't do it, and we mustn't sign off on these orders, and the other two are saying, no, we must, it's our duty to do it. And they end up, there's this big debate, this big argument. They all fall out, and eventually two of them end up dueling each other in the bazaar, and wounding each other and all the rest of it. Not particularly seriously, it doesn't seem, but it all happens in public. So that stuff happens very immediately. Other things take some unpicking. Other things you have to sort of look at. I had a couple of instances where people are mentioned in passing, and then you have to pick those details out. So as I tell my students, whenever we go through a source, take copious notes. Things that you don't think are going to be important may turn out to be the linchpin of an argument you're making. So yes, the answer is carefully. how do you go through it? Slowly and carefully.
That's very, very true. And I think sometimes it's those little details that just make all the difference. As you said, it can sort of show something, or become a very important example of a bigger point that you're making. That's very interesting, though. I'm looking forward to reading all about this in your book, which I have actually pre-ordered. So when you were going through all of this, so what surprised you? I mean, what came at you, or is there something that really changed your mind about the research that you were working on?
Lots of things, actually. So I went in with a sort of preconception of what the East India Company was and what it did, in terms of an historical perspective, and sort of thought I would see a relatively domineering English community doing English imperial things, proto-imperial things, and the answer is that nothing could be further from the truth. It's the complete opposite. They have very little local authority to start with, and they build it up very carefully through a series of relationships that they slot into local power structures and local habits around civility and sociability. And they're very flexible. They arrive at a time in the 1620s when Shah Abbas I is sort of actively looking outward. So the sort of Safavid authorities, if you like, are very receptive to the arrival of the English. So that was a good start. But what you find is that the English have to fit very carefully into what the Persians want. What is the right thing to do here? I sort of found that my whole idea of a sort of dominant or domineering English company in the East was actually a small community of people, mostly going about their own business, being invited, occasionally being invited to all the right parties, sometimes not, and then complaining about it. But living, working, unfortunately, sadly, very often dying, and what all of that was about. And I said that earlier on that I look at trade. I have a chapter on trade, but what I was more interested in was the mechanisms around that and the negotiations around that, rather than looking at the raw data of how much cloth has been sold on at a particular time, or whether they were buying silk, or all of this sort of thing. It's mostly because it's been done brilliantly, frankly, by other scholars, including Rudi Mattei, Willem Floor, Edmund Herzig. They have done that sort of more raw economic work, and I didn't feel the need to sort of reopen that particular old wound. I thought it was better to try and look at it more frankly, more creatively, because, as I said, that work has been done and really well. I didn't think that I would add a huge amount to it. But yeah, trade is why they're there. But how does that trade actually work in practice? Was what I was interested in.
No, that's fascinating because I mean, prevailing thought is that the English replaced the Portuguese as this sort of imperial force in the Persian Gulf, and it's interesting to sort of see it from a very different perspective, where you see the Safavids and basically being the dominant power and sort of interacting with this trading force. And I think that's a very important narrative as well, sort of restoring the agency of the Safavids themselves to an extent. And I think it's fantastic that you've looked at sort of a more cultural, I suppose, exchange rather than just solely focusing on the commercial side of things. And I think that's definitely something that we don't know much about, sort of the social histories of the peoples who came there and how the peoples were affected by the arrival of the English community, I suppose. No, it's very, very, very fascinating. And I suppose this brings on to the next question, which was what the publication process was like, because the cover of the book is fantastic, and I absolutely love it. I suppose that sort of captures exactly captures the lifestyle, the trends, and the fashion of the time. So
Yeah.
if yeah, maybe we can start there when we talk about the publication process.
So well, with the cover. So
Yes,
that,
please.
yeah, the cover is so that the cover comes from a mural in Chehel Sotun Palace, so a palace built by Abbas II, I think it is, in Esfahan. And there are a number of these frescoes that have images of Europeans in various sort of poses and all the rest of it, very often drinking wine. Well, plus ça change. So and this slightly loose gentleman is one of them. So he sort of adorns the walls of this palace in Esfahan, and I don't know who he is. I don't think he may be a company merchant. I think maybe he is. Judging by his dress, I think he is probably English. There are some who are definitely Portuguese, like the wide-brimmed round hats and that kind of thing. He may be Portuguese, but I like to think he's English. I've sort of decided. There's no way of knowing, of course. But yeah, so the fact that that Europeans more generally are kind of these objects of fascination. And as I say, you get these lovely frescoes, and I chose this one out of from a couple of different ones to do it. Now, my publisher, who was IB Taurus, which is now an imprint of Bloomsbury, I signed my contract in sort of late 2019. Must have been November 2019. And again, little did we know that we were going to end up in a pandemic, but such is life. Um, and actually, from there, the process was very, very good. So it went out for review. I got comments back. I made some changes and some revisions. And sort of over the last, what would it be, 2 years, just over 2 years, it's gone through this process very smoothly. My editors, Rory Gormley and Yasmin Garcha, have been very helpful throughout. So yeah, no, actually it was very easy. The thing I hated most was doing the copy editing and going through with copy editors, because there were some things that I wanted to keep and wanted to change, and things like a ship always being her, which I know is rather an old-fashioned thing, but I think a ship should always be her. And the copy editors did not like that at all. They did not get that should be the way it was. I won that battle in the end. But yeah, things like the copy editing process, again, they're very slick at this. It truly is a sort of a very, very slick profession, and it's great to work with them. With the cover design as well, getting those ideas through and discussing them with Yasmin. was a great pleasure. Yeah, it's really nice. So, well, I do like that one, but which is your favourite? You know, all that kind of thing. So yeah, no, I would say that the publication process from sort of proposal to publication took about 2.5 years, and yeah, for the most part, was very smooth.
Oh, happy to hear that. Happy to hear that. It's an IB Taurus, they've been in the game for a long, long time, and
Oh yeah, yeah.
you've chosen a very good home for your book, I think. And were there other photos? I mean, pictures that you were considering, or was this
Oh
the
yeah,
only one?
there were a couple that I don't think I actually, he's not in the book, but there's another one of a chap who, you know, is also very richly dressed, who has a little dog that's next to him, but it didn't quite work in the same way on the page.
Mm.
But somewhere, I know I've got a photo of him somewhere, but I don't know where it is. But yeah, there were a few other options. So this other European, and then an image I took of when I went to Iran in 2012, from Chehel Satun, which is another European sitting down at a table drinking wine from a goblet with these beautiful Persian, long-necked wine bottles next to him. And yeah, I saw in him a kindred spirit. Uh, but yeah, so there were a few images in contention, but that I sort of sent to tourists and yeah, their designers. Got a few, yeah, got some images back, and that was the one I chose in the end after wide consultation.
Of course, and many glasses of wine, I'm sure. Yeah,
Yeah, one or two.
while pondering over. That's good. But thank you so much, Peter, for taking the time to talk to us about your book. I'm very, very excited for it. I think it's a very important book. It's a history we don't know much about, especially when it comes to the more social and cultural side of things. I think it's great that you've restored their history in some way. And sort of just to end things, what's next for you? Are you thinking of staying within this world, or are you moving on to a different plane?
I'm currently looking for a job.
Of course.
So,
Aren't
aren't
we
we all?
all?
So yeah, for now, my sort of focus has been on getting this book out, and then moving on to the next thing in terms of work. I'm very sorry to leave Kent after
Mm,
after 3 years there, but unfortunately, such as an early career's life. Yes, so a lot of the work I'm doing at the minute, writing up, are things that sort of matters arising from the research in the book. So as I said, I'm writing an article at the minute that looks at why it is, or why it appears that these non-Europeans who are very central to the company's business actually want to work for the company at all.
mm, mm,
Why be involved at all?
mm,
And that kind of I'm looking at the work of people like James Onley, looking at the idea of a native agent or a subaltern, and where how far back we can actually see that happening. And these people are central to what the company does. I'm also really interested in looking at the material culture of Persia's trade with Europe and Europe's trade with Persia, and looking at it in terms of, again, Persia as a separate entity from just India or just the East or just any of these things. And that requires looking a bit more at material culture, which is something I'm very interested in, very excited by. So I'm staying within the same area for now, basically because there's still so much more to do. There's no lack of material, there's no lack of new things to tell. But again, unfortunately, given given the tyranny of India as this sort of central nexus of everything we know about the company and everything that we know about Europe's interaction with non-Europeans, yes, I think I'm going to continue this, fighting this little corner about Persia's place in early modern Indian Ocean trade and global trade, and I think it's got something to do with fashion.
No, that's fantastic. I think I really look forward to hearing more about this because it's absolutely fascinating, and I think it's important to sort of pull away from these mainstays of these histories, namely India. But there's so much more from from Hormuz, and personally from as a Malaysian, we're also very interested in how. I'm also very interested in how Malacca, sort of in that trade route, also plays a huge part because it does get sidelined quite a lot. So yeah, it's
No,
important.
absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot. So I
Mm,
started looking again also at Mocha as a
mm,
separate factory. So
mm,
where the coffee trade really
mm, mm,
comes from really.
mm,
But yeah, looking at these factories that aren't in the center,
mm,
the periphery. But again,
mm.
I'm sort of reluctant to label them as
Yeah, sure,
periphery.
sure.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, the Malay Peninsula,
yeah.
Malacca, places like that. Went to
Mm.
Malacca a couple of years
Oh,
ago.
really? That's fun.
I love Malacca.
Oh, thank you.
If I could live there, I would.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
fantastic place. I love it. Mm,
so yeah, there's all of these,
mm,
there's all of these stories still to tell. And yeah,
absolutely.
if I become the champion of the East India Company periphery from Mocha to Malacca, I'm
Oh,
okay.
that's a good one. That's a
I
good
know,
one.
right? And
That's a
even
good one.
it's alliterative.
It's alliterative, exactly.
Yeah. No, all I have
Uh,
to do is learn Malay.
Oh, it's an I'm from it's an easy language. It's I have to say. I mean, well, that's for another topic, but it's not
Another time, yeah.
it's not too difficult. I can say that. But thank you so much, Peter, again for talking to us. I'm looking forward to everything that you'll come up with next, and I'll definitely put a link into the Bloomsbury page and the Amazon page. I think these are the two places you
Yeah,
can order the book
that's right.
from.
Yeah.
I'll add that, and please pre-order if you're listening, and or order because by then maybe it's already out. So,
Oh, yeah.
but thanks again, Peter, and good luck with everything, and take care. Congratulations again.
Thank you very much for having me again, and pleasure to talk to you. Do take care.
Thank you.
Bye.